Okay, greetings to all of you today. Today we are having the paper of Felix Akinboyewa. Akinboyewa, okay, correct. Who is giving a presentation on politics of violence and terrorism in the Nigerian democracy and its implications on national peace and security. Now, Felix is the head of welfare and aftercare department at the Nigerian Correctional Service in Ibadan, so it's part of the state, part of the state repressive apparatus. He holds an MSc in Peace Studies and Conflict Resolution and a postgraduate diploma in Criminology and Security Studies from the National Open University of Nigeria. From 2014 to 16, he worked as teaching assistant at the National Open University of Nigeria, Department of Peace and Conflict Studies, and he is working on his PhD, which is on Conflict Analysis and Management Program at Kent State University, Ohio. Welcome, Felix. You have 25 minutes after the haggling.
Good morning. Good morning. I want to thank Arab Center for this opportunity given unto me. It's a privilege and I really appreciate it. And I've learned a lot through the course of these few days we have spent here, and I'm hoping to learn more. My paper is on politics of violence and terrorism in the Nigerian democracy and its implication on national peace and security. Nigeria got her independence in 1960, and it has been ruled by military ever since, although we have about 3 republics in between the 4th republic we are in right now. And the 4th republic started 1999, after 16 years of uninterrupted rules by the military. So the President Obasanjo got to the power in 1999. And after, when the democracy started, we realized there are many armed violences in many areas of Nigeria. And it escalated after the takeoff of democracy. And the subsequent democratic setting has built the foundation on this 1999 democracy setting. That means the Obasanjo regime. So we have many violence in and everywhere. The transition and subsequent democratic settings made a value-breeding atmosphere. The national security of lives and properties were at the lowest ebb. There were violence, political violence everywhere, every corner of the country. And there were emergence of ethno-religious militia and vigilante groups such as OPC and Bakassi Boys. These were meant to curtail the violence, the political violence, the election violence of the community, because they were organized, they were established by the community to wage wars against the political violence in the country. But the emergence of these ethno-religious groups, they were supposed to be securing the citizens and the properties and lives of citizens, but instead they were found to be extorting money from the citizens instead, and they were supposed to protect the citizens. They were supposed to protect. So, realizing this, some rival gangs sprang up. They want to take part in the national cake. They want to have their national cake. So, like men that mass up, and ultimately, there were banditries. There were armed violence against each other and even against the society. And this created brushes against state security forces with civilians caught in the crossfire. I want to state before I go further that this research is based on domestic terrorism and political violence is not on the, can I say, let me say international terrorism. Everybody knows about, like Boko Haram, all those insurgents, but it's based on domestic terrorism and political violence, and you get to learn further as we go on. So I'm not talking how we have a gun culture in Nigeria now. I'm just giving the history of how gun culture was established in Nigeria. So all these ethno-militia groups, they were fighting against each other, and they were fighting against the citizens. So everybody wants to get their own national cake. They want to fight for their survival, fight for the natural resources. So they acquire small arms and light weapons. And eventually, they acquire sophisticated weapons, as you see in the diagram above. So this was the fertile ground in which electoral violence easily thrives, gradually exacerbated by sophistication as more deadly weapons are used. Political violence definition. According to Gore, 1970, he defines political violence as all forms of collective attack in a political regime. And we all know that violence is everywhere. We can find it everywhere in the Middle East. We can find it in Africa, in Europe, and in America. But the violence in Nigeria, especially the political one, is of the high proportion. Political violence is a twin concept in Nigeria political terrain. That is, it exists in one form or the other in a society and every institution of society. Terrorism in Nigeria, just like I said the other time, that this research work is on domestic terrorism. And the domestic terrorism, the major form of domestic terrorism in Nigeria is political assassination. Although we have other forms, we have religious, we have social, we have ethnic, we have environmental, but this research work is based on political assassination, based on political violence, election violence, and all those forms of violence during election, particularly during election. This constitutes a serious threat to stabilization of democracy and threatens national peace and security. Apart from the political assassination, we have state or government-sponsored terrorism, although there are many unconfirmed reports that government and state do engage in domestic terrorism. They stiff domestic opposition through selective assassination. They hide their involvement through process, so you won't know who is perpetrating the evil. And their actions are difficult to trace, and they maintain respectability and legitimacy, while covertly sponsoring terrorism to achieve their socio-political objectives. Now, threat of terrorism, from the takeoff of democracy in 1999, just like I said the other time, many renowned and high-profile individuals have been assassinated. One of them is Bola Ige, the first image by the right, on top. He was Attorney General, and even the Attorney General and Chief of Justice in Nigeria. He was murdered cold-blooded in his house at Ibadan. Likewise, the next picture is Olatoye Temitope Sugar. He was a member of the Federal Representative, and he was murdered cold-blooded when he went to his constituent this last March 2019. And the next one, Funsho Williams and Barnabas with his wife, they were murdered in cold-blooded. Brazen escalation of political violence and the air of insecurity have been further worsened by an epidemic of political assassination. Post-election violence in Nigeria, 2011 to 2015. The election in Nigeria, the post-election in Nigeria after that 2011 was considered to be bloodiest. Several houses were burnt, many people were killed, and this caused displacement. Thousands of people were displaced. And this really occurred most in the Adamawa State, Kano State, Kaduna, Bauchi, and some other region. Why the need for the study of this nature? The history of political violence and association in Nigeria has been very high during 20 years of democratic politics. It has threatened national peace and security. Therefore, there is a need for the study. There was a need for the study of this nature. My research questions are: what exactly is the nature of political violence and terrorism in the Nigerian democracy? Was there any factor responsible for the politics of violence and terrorism in the Nigerian democracy? What implications can it have on democratic consolidation, national peace, and security? And what solution can be provided to eradicate terrorist acts and political violence in the Nigerian democracy? The signal of the study is to help to educate the politicians on their conduct during elections. Because the politicians, they want to get into the power by all means. So they commit horrendous violence, they commit numerous violence and engage our youth to perpetrate those evils. So they need to be educated on how to conduct themselves. We have to educate our security agents because they are used during election to cause havoc instead of securing the votes, instead of securing the people. But they instead collude with those politicians to rig elections and to cause havoc like political assassination. And this research, I think, and I'm very sure it will contribute to the body of knowledge in the field of political science, peace, and security. Pareto and Mosca, they are two terrorists in the that claims that the personal attribute of individuals separate the rulers from the ruled. For Pareto, it is the psychological characteristics of the leaders that make them who they are. According to him, this individual possess a high degree of cunningness and intelligence, which are the basic prerequisites for governance. So, through their cunningness and intelligence, they want to hold onto the power. They want to spend 20 years on power, 25 years on power. So they are ready to do anything that will jeopardize the democracy, that will jeopardize the peace and security of the nation. Mosca, on the other hand, argues that oligarchy, the government by the few, is an indispensable feature of life. He, like Kamal's, bases his analysis on the idea that there are two categories of people in our society. These are the classes that govern and the governed. So, Mosca postulates that by the nature of their position they always perform political functions because of this privilege. They monopolize power being. So the positions in Nigeria, they are selfish, they are self-centered, they want to be in power, they want to, anything that is in their way, they want to get rid of them. And the liberal school of thought also was of opinion that political struggle is more or less economic struggle, and the concerned society in which there are no enough consumer goods to satisfy the economic needs of the populace. The same happens in the political realm. Political assassination occurs as individual consumer struggles for economic maximization. So the struggle for political power, both of them are a form of struggle for life, which basically sets one group against the other. And the humanist theory is in form of a frustration, aggression, and relative repression theory. The youth in our society in Nigeria, since they lack unemployment, they lack basic needs, they tend to embrace anything that will give them this needs, that will provide this needs for them. So they embark on political violence. The methodology, the subjects, 220 subjects were selected from Ibadan, not local government or your state. And why did I choose Ibadan? Ibadan was famous for the political killings and political assassination in Nigeria. Out of all those political assassinated in the last 20 years, Ibadan, close to more than 2/3 were assassinated at Ibadan. Bola Ige was assassinated at Ibadan. Barnabas, while he was living in Ibadan. And this last one, March 2019, Temitope was assassinated at Ibadan. So the need for the study of at this location. And this questionnaire and interview were used. And the source of data included books, journal, magazine, newspaper, and internet. Passages and tables were used. So the research findings. The first interview, some prominent Nigerians were interviewed, and their views were grouped into two. The first one is they were of the opinion that prevailing economic conditions, poverty, and unemployment were are major causes of political violence, election violence in Nigeria. And another opinion is that due other affairs of positions to get into power by all means were the major causes of political violence in Nigeria. So the questionnaire, the respondents responded, and the questionnaire gave it to the respondents. The majority, 83%, agreed that poor electoral administration is one of the causes of political violence and terrorism in Nigeria. Most often, the weakness of the or failure of the institution to perform their functions impartially is responsible for electoral violence. Poor preparation of the electoral administrators and disenfranchisement of voters can cause electoral violence in Nigeria. And another factor responsible for the politics of violence and terrorism is election rigging. When elections are rigged with thug rigging, obstruction, and excess executive and bureaucratic manipulations, the outcome is almost certainly not going to reflect the people's will. No wonder Fanika Ode, as quoted in Dolly, 1973, said, "Whether you vote for us or not, we will remain in power." So that one is to show you how the position wants to remain in power by all means. And another factor is poor security system. This is one of the factors responsible for most political and electoral violence in the country. In most cases, where police personnel and other security agents provided are deliberately absent in order to perpetuate acts of violence to favor a particular party and their candidate. The police, nowadays, of recent time now, the Nigerian army now have been drafted to secure electoral centers, whereas they're supposed to stay at the barrack, to be at barrack, but for reasons best known to the government, they drive the military into election centers, and these are having really negative impact in voting pattern in Nigeria now, because everybody wants to stay indoor. They don't want to have gunshot from the errant military officers. So this has been affecting the the outcome of elections results in Nigeria. Religious and ethnic sentiment is also part of the factor responsible for the politics of violence in Nigeria, because there are certain religions that want to associate with their member and they want to vote for their member. There are certain groups that want to vote for their members, and this has been causing violence, because if their member are not voted for, they start the violence and causing havoc in the country. The problem of poverty and unemployment also is another cause of factors of political violence and terrorism in Nigeria. Youth over exuberance. Youth, they want to try many things. They have energy, so they come out in mass. And if anything is not going to their plan, they are ready to destroy properties and even lives of the populace, of the citizens. And the low level of education is also among the factors responsible for the poor policies of violence in Nigeria. Inadequate knowledge of information or information politics, particularly electoral processes, coupled with low level of education, the high level of deprivation and impoverishment of the Nigerian youth, force men to take the easily available job opportunity for coordinators of electoral violence, as we can observe from human needs theory. And the research question, the third research questions, is all about how this thing, what are the implications of this policies of violence and terrorism in Nigeria. And the question were grouped into two, that what is the extent of this electoral violence? And 60% of the respondents agree that it's of great extent. The interviews are of the opinion that electoral violence has implications on the democratic consolidation, peace and security, because it usually leads to destruction of lives and properties, as well as redirecting the nation's money to security matters, which otherwise would have been used for developmental purposes. And what extent does it have on national peace and security? 66% says it's of great extent. Terrorism and its many faces have become part and parcel of Nigeria, and it's corrosive, devastating. Implications cannot go unmentioned. Apart from egregious killings of human beings, political assassinations as variant of domestic terrorism, violence in Nigeria threatens national peace and stability. And the research question number 4 asks the question, how do we measure, what are the measures to be taken to eradicate this political violence? And I grouped the 4 responses together so that it will not be voluminous and it will not sound boring. The 83% says that employment opportunity, provision of employment opportunity will go a long way. 75% says good economic policy will go a long way. 70% says making political posts unattractive will go a long way. And 72% says increase in education funding will go a long way. And if you want to say this truly, I think employment opportunity, good economic policy, making political posts unattractive, because our politicians, the senators and the members of the House of Representatives, the average earning per month is about they earn more than they earn times 10 of the what president even earns, because they are in they are in the politics, so they know how to get their ways in. So, and people have been clamoring that they should reduce the salaries and emoluments of these public officers. So they want to get to the power by force, because they know when they get there, automatically they are now richer. So, in conclusion, Nigeria is faced with high-intensity political violence that contains elements of terrorism. No doubt about that one. And this terrorism and political violence is undermining national security and threatening political stability. And this has increased the risk of internet terrorism in Nigeria. Reason is that the youth that are not employed, that roam about, that engage in political violence, they are prone to recruit from these international terrorist groups. And this will usually affect the national peace and security. And the recommendation is that the recommendations are constitutions must be strengthened to cater for Nigerian unity in diversity. Because Nigerians, the ethnicity in Nigeria, the ethnic groups in Nigeria, they are numerous, they are uncountable, they are numerous to count, and we have many languages, we have many diversity. So the problem in Nigeria, the political violence, are partly from resource allocation. Certain groups, certain regions wants to have more resources allocated to them because they are the producers of this oil, and certain one will say we are also citizens of this country. The resources must be shared equally. So we must try to the constitution must be strengthened to cater for example, those who are in all rich region to have more benefits, to have more resources, to have more allocation from the national treasury than those where the resources are not found. For example, in the south part of Nigeria, where we have the oils, they have 13% derivative. Like compared to the north, where they don't have these resources, they share this derivative. So they are agitating that they must have access to more money from the federal government. So security network must be bracing up. We must discourage this military coming out of the election, coming out during the election to scare people away, to shoot sporadically. The legal measures against all acts of terrorism must be observed, because there are certain people they think they have power. They think they are above the law, so they commit all kinds of atrocity. And if care is not taken, those ones they almost go scot-free. So the legal measures must be taken to include the political class and the lower class, so that everybody will live in peace. And controlling firearms and explosives, because as I mentioned in the other time that we have a gun culture in Nigeria, and that started during this democracy in Nigeria. So everybody owns gun. All the groups, they own guns. So we must control. Although the government tried to give them amnesty some times ago, those who brings their gun, that they will offer them monetary value. But still, we still have many guns. For example, those the subject I took, the 220 subject I took, they were majorly of Nigerian Union of Road Transport Workers, and those ones, they are used by the politicians. They are even used by government. For example, there's no election in Nigeria now that they don't recruit members from the National Union of Road Transport Workers. It's a group, it's a new union of those who drive taxi, drive buses. But the members are known for their thuggery. They are known for bad things. So, and government, the politicians know that if they recruit them, they will be able to give them more votes. So they use them now, and they give them guns. And eventually, when the election is concluded, maybe they forgot to collect the guns back, or maybe those ones decide not to give them the guns back. So there are many guns in many of these people. So they must control the firearms and explosives. Then the border security must be tightened. From Niger, from Cameroon, from Benin Republic, there are influence of guns into the country. And the economy of Nigeria, the government must strengthen economy to enhance employment opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Felix. I think you have tackled an interesting topic about violence and terrorism and their role in undermining democracy. You did choose a defined era, which is the third or the fourth republic now? Fourth Republic of the 1999. And you tried also to use empirical methods of opinion or survey. I think if I have to make some comments, I will start with the broad definition of violence or the interest of violence you are using, usually this creates problems. If you seem to spoken of terrorism, but you focus mainly on state action. And you also used post-electoral violence. And I think these categories are slightly different, or not slightly, I think markedly different from each other. Random after electoral violence usually happens by spontaneous or maybe with a little incitement, and it's mass action, and it involves more than one party. Usually when speaking about violence or terrorism, we have to focus on a certain group. Again, state action, the way you portray it in assassinations seems to be problematic in many ways, in the sense that what evidence is there that it is the state that carried this, either directly or by proxy. But I think more important than this is that there has always the way why the United Nations has difficulty in agreeing on a definition of terrorism was mainly due to difference about this action, about how do you classify state action, which is like terror-like. It's interestingly that this division was between third world countries and the first world countries. The third world countries, the issue which they disagreed on is about so-called national resistance against colonialism. The third world states were saying that you shouldn't classify organizations which are fighting for independence or autonomy against colonialism, like the Palestinians in Israel, or in the past also the black majority in South Africa, and so on and so on. You shouldn't classify these as terrorists because they are fighting for a right which is guaranteed by the UN, which is the right of self-determination. So this should be looked at as legal war. Secondly, the third world countries were saying that, well, violence committed by strong force powers like the America or Britain or their allies or Russia, who would, for example, go and do atrocities in Chechnya or in Palestine or somewhere else, is not considered terrorism, and should be considered terrorism. So state terror should be included in the definition of terrorism. Now, this is all important, and I think the high-level panel, which was convened in 2005, has tried to justify this by saying that, okay, we should agree that terrorism is any act which targets non-combatants in any conflict. So in this regard, it should be agreed that even if you are fighting a lawful resistance, you shouldn't target non-combatants. And in this, but they also insisted on excluding a state act from being classified as terrorist, because they said their argument was that this is already covered by war crimes legislation and international law. So we don't need to classify state action as terrorist. So in this regard, if you are focusing on state action, it would be problematic to calling it terrorism in this respect. So two things I think you probably may need if you are engaging in other research on this topic. focus on exactly on what type of violence you want to include and what type of actors, state actors or non-state actors, and take into account these debates about what terrorism, what violence is. And I think certainly I wouldn't try to lump all sorts of kind of violence like after state elections or after election violence or other mass, let's say, protests or fighting between groups. This could not actually, you can't call both sides which are fighting terrorism, because terrorism has to be, at least, although the difficulties of defining it should be included in a more coherent and use. Second, in the rationale for your research, you mentioned three things. Most of them, or all of them, are in the service of policymakers, to enlighten, to help, to... this is good if you are writing a report by a think tank or an NGO or a government commission. But if you are doing scientific research, your rationale should be about what kind of knowledge you want to produce, what kind of difficulties and questions you want to address, and how do you want to address them in a new way, and what hypotheses you are putting forth, and how do you think this will add to knowledge. So you are not, well, I know you work as a government employee in a certain way, so this is probably why you are influenced by this. But usually, we academics think of ourselves as a little bit above this. Don't look at this, look down on the politicians, we are not in their service. But that's a joke. Usually, nowadays, with this impact culture, you have to prove that your ivory tower work has relevance to the masses and to the little wretched politicians. So we make some condescensions at one point and say, maybe write a footnote and say, well, this is where it helps. I think this finally, the methodology you have adapted in using a survey to address an issue of how violence undermines democracy, I think is problematic, because whatever sample you use, you are getting opinions of people who might not be, let's say, qualified to make judgment about these issues, which is the question you were asking is a kind of complex theoretical issue, and also maybe has empirical about how violence affected democracy, or how terrorist violence undermined democracy. So this would have a number of problems. First of all, since you use violence here in a very broad term, the people who are being questioned, if they are most ordinary people, they wouldn't even understand, for example, differentiate between one kind of violence and also the way violence undermines democracy. I mean, there are of course, a common sense understanding of problematicness between violence and democracy. But if we, for example, go to America today, which is supposed to be a very democratic and very advanced democracy, a lot of people, including the president and the majority of Congress, don't think that gun violence by individuals against other individuals undermine democracy, but actually they claim that this is the real genuine democracy, because the Second Amendment to the Constitution apparently guarantees the citizens the right to murder each other with impunity. So that's actually democracy. So if you do this survey in America, you probably get lots of answers which say, well, what's wrong with violence? A man has to have his gun and kill his neighbor. That's a legitimate human right. Since you also, these governments, some of the violence you mentioned is popular mass violence itself, the people themselves engaging, like attacking Jonathan, good luck, which many people might think is a very democratic thing to do. So I think maybe I'll leave some of this to the audience to maybe comment on. I think having a survey to determine an academic question rather than to have the opinion of people about things and then evaluate this opinion is problematic. I think just a final interesting, an interesting fact in what you come up with is that you rightly mentioned that the current republic democratization was inaugurated by the election of Obasanjo. We remember that, of course, Obasanjo himself was a military ruler at one point. But although he's praised for having, at that time, handed over to a democratic government, and now we have a president also who was a military ruler who actually did the first coup against that government. So that would be interesting, since the military are now the leaders of democracy in Nigeria. That's very interesting. Thank you very much. You can comment if you want to.
Thank you, Prof. As you rightly mentioned, the report on the state terrorism, since it's not a confirmed report, it's not, so we cannot dwell on that one. I agree. That was the reason I mentioned that, because I mentioned it on the project, that unconfirmed report, just mere speculation. It was just rumors, but I think in future it is possible for some researchers to dwell on that, to research more on that. So, and your comment on the rationale behind the research, I will work on that. Although you mentioned it's more or less like a policy research work, and not more of academic. Although since you are aware, I have been working for the government for a while. Although I want to, since I want to do more of now research in academy, so I will make use of the advice, sir, and the methodology. It's true you said those ones, because they are not well educated. Those ones, the respondents, they are not well educated. But in my future research work, I will consider that one and make amendments. Thank you.